if I'm doing these jokes in private, I think it's much more acceptable because the context allows for me to do it in an environment where I can control a lot of things. Would you not argue that doing things at a stand-up comedy show is very similar?
Absolutely. Well, no. I'm curious.
I want to disagree with you on that one, but yeah.
You wouldn't, or you would?
I would.
Okay, yeah, so I'm super curious. So, if you, in the feeling of your mind, does it feel different if, let's say you were talking to a black person, and they started bringing up...
Oh yes, the original topic we wanted to cover, because I messaged you about this, was on the topic of jokes normalizing or encouraging violence. You said that you'd probably agree with me on most things, but you felt like there's still some instances in which jokes or humor can normalize or encourage violence.
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably have to, if we're being honest with our speech or honest with our ideas about our speech, I'm sure that if you act in a certain way enough, you can probably normalize like certain attitudes towards certain things that can lead to harm. I don't know if that made sense.
Okay, yeah. So explain that to me.
If I say like enough racial jokes towards a certain person, or if that becomes like a normalized part of society over time, it wouldn't surprise me if like some people had slightly worse views of those people, leading to them, you know, dehumanizing them a bit more, leading to them having a higher propensity for being violent towards those people. It's a pretty disconnected chain, but or not disconnected, but it's like a pretty long, there's like a multi-step process there. But I'm sure like at some point inevitably you could trace one back to the other.
Okay, yeah. So feels a little nebulous for me just because, again, it's hard to make that link. Just to give context to everybody who's listening, a lot of folks have felt like, in light of like Dave Chappelle's most recent special, that a lot of his jokes or his humorous bits were normalizing or encouraging the violence against trans people.
I don't agree with that, but...
I mean, maybe not in his instance, but I do think as a whole, maybe you can look at comedy and try to figure out instances. For me, I guess what I struggle with in that, jokes and comedy in general, most of it centers around reinforcing negative stereotypes. That is what the genre does. You go to any comedy show, a good half of it is going to be comedians reinforcing negative stereotypes about whatever group. And comedy in general traditionally always has a victim at the person who's the butt of the joke. So I think what a lot of people are essentially saying is that because his jokes reinforce negative stereotypes about trans folks, and he does them consistently enough, therefore, that contributes to a culture of violence, if you will. And that's what I was kind of railing against. So maybe we just start there, and then afterwards we can kind of extrapolate to something a little bit larger in regards to...
I actually went and I watched these jokes, but I've forgotten all of them because I just didn't care that much. To have some... context for the Dave Chapelle stuff, I don't remember him. They didn't seem like egregious jokes, like such that like, oh my god, I hate trans people and it's so funny that he's reinforcing my hatred of trans people. I didn't get that impression listening to them. They just came off as like a little bit like slightly ignorant, I guess, in terms of like the social niceties that we would take or responsibilities we take about having certain types of discussions, but they didn't come off as like overly hateful to me. But I'd have to rewatch it again now because I don't remember. I remember listening to it, I was like, this is like, ugh. I didn't care that much.
So I think this is a problem that both people make a mistake of, like on both sides of the aisle. Sometimes people go to comedy shows or they'll see Dave Chappelle, I'm like, oh my god, what a beacon of truth. And then the other side of the aisle is like, no, it's fake news. During his joke about the baby, he didn't just shoot a random person. He shot in self-defense. So why is he making that comparison with the gay? I was just thinking to myself, like, I think both these people are coming at this wrong. One thing that comics often do is they'll stretch facts. They will literally insert new facts that have nothing to do with the story if they're covering something in the news. I think coming at any kind of comedy show and expecting truth of sorts makes me cringe a little bit, because the very nature of comedy and stand-up is like exaggeration.
Sure.
So when people say, oh, well, this feels like ignorant dialogue, I'm like...
Exaggeration has purpose. I'll say that. If you're exaggerating some parts of a story, the things that you're choosing to exaggerate are not at random. You're typically doing it purposefully, right? Like you have you're exaggerating something for a reason, right? So like are you familiar with like what happened with Zimmerman and Trayvon?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so like if I tell a joke, there are two different ways of like phrasing this, where it's like, you know, I might say like, oh, you know, like Zimmerman, this guy, you know, thinks he's a neighborhood police trying to hunt down, you know, dangerous black kids in the neighborhood. Like I might say, like if I start a joke off like that, that's an exaggeration. That's not what Zimmerman does all the time. Okay, that's a huge exaggeration. But if I exaggerate the other way, like Trayvon, you know, black kid running around up to no good in these neighborhoods, you know, knocking over trash cans, doing some dumb shit. That's another.
Wait, can we just appreciate that sounded like the start of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air song?
Oh, sure, okay.
Started making trouble in her neighborhood.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So like, I can exaggerate both of those. Like, those are both forms of exaggeration, but I can't hand wave them. Like, oh yeah, like both of those are just exaggeration. Like, I'm clearly trying to express a different point based on the things that I choose to exaggerate. Right. And one, my exaggeration is trying to sort of like, you know, Zimmerman is a piece of shit who's up to like just trying to, you know, find people to start shit with. Fuck that guy. And then in another one, I'm like, you know, Trayvon had it fucking coming. Like, why is this kid running around starting trouble? You know, I think the things that we choose to exaggerate are purposeful and meaningful, and they will like determine how our message is viewed. Rightfully so, I think.
Okay. Interesting. So,
hey, whoa, guys, whoa. If you're on YouTube right now, we're trying desperately, okay? August is getting fired if I don't hit 400,000 subs by the 1st. So if you like August editing, if you like my editor, okay, you better subscribe and hit the bell, okay?
They are meaningful and purposeful. I would agree with you that they're purposeful, okay? Mm-hmm. What I would disagree is that they're meaningful and that they're somehow a reflection of someone's biases or political views.
Okay. I super disagree, but go ahead.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Oftentimes, comics will obfuscate the truth or whatever because they know it leads to whatever they think is funniest. Not all the times, but often. Mm-hmm. And even if something doesn't completely align with your worldviews, if you find something funny enough or an observation funny enough or an angle funny enough, you will still tell the joke. Now, I would not disagree in saying that in some cases it can be reflective of somebody's personal views on a matter. What I am saying, however, is that it doesn't inherently go down that road, and it's hard to tell from my perspective. What would you say?
I think that are you familiar with the phrase "death of the author"?
No.
Or is it death of the artist? I think death of the author. It's something I very much believe in and subscribe to. The intention of any particular piece of media is kind of relevant, but not really. What's more important is the cultural context and in which it's being received, because that's going to ultimately determine, like, the goal of any piece of art is to produce an effect on the viewer. And that effect always happens within the context of a greater culture.
Sure.
Yeah, if I think that, let's say that I find a series of geometric patterns and I think that these are beautiful and elegant and they represent some, you know, equation, and when I graph them out, it spells the N-word. And I just make a giant painting of this over and over and over again. I look and I say, like, look at the beauty of this math. Nobody's going to view it that way, right? And I can't really say, like, okay, well, hold on, just ignore it. Don't stop focusing so much on the word it spells. Just look at how nice the math is, right? It's going to be interpreted a certain way. So this is like the concept of like the death of the author. It doesn't really matter what your intention is, or it can maybe have a little bit of influence, but it's largely going to matter how like a certain society or culture receives that piece of art. So if you're telling jokes, and a lot of comedy is observational, or it's poking fun at like observations about like human behavior. But if you're telling jokes and you're consistently exaggerating, you know, certain parts, I do think that can be indicative. Hold on, let me make that stronger. I would say that is indicative of your kind of internal view of the world. I don't know if you've also, I'm harping on race a lot because you're black and I'm white, so it's a little bit different. But if this is uncomfortable, you can always tell me to off or do a different example. But I imagine that there are probably some people that you can talk to and maybe you feel like they're a little bit racist, but they haven't actually said anything explicitly racist to you. It might just be like the choice of words or the way that they talk to you or whatever. Do you ever get that feeling, or do you think that's a thing or no?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I feel like as a comedian, like if you're telling jokes and you're constantly harping on or reinforcing, you know, like certain types of stereotypes or certain things in some direction, I think not only can it be indicative of like a lower lying bias that you may or may not know you have, I think it can also reinforce or plant the audience expectations as well, I would say.
Okay, so I would agree on it playing to your biases because obviously, you're gonna probably write jokes from your perspective. I don't think too many people can be like, well, I'm a straight guy, but I can imagine what the trend like. It's very difficult to put yourself in other people's shoes. So you're always going to be writing things from your perspective, vast majority of the time. And I would also agree with you that it plays into the audience's expectations sometimes. Sure, I could agree with those two things. But how does that relate to the kill the author thing?
Death of the author. That was more broadly that I don't think you can say, oh yeah, sure, maybe some people could view this as being really transphobic or really homophobic, but I didn't intend it that way. My intention is never to bring hatred to these people. So if that happens, that's their fault. If you're reinforcing everybody's social norms and if you're engaged in behavior that is easier for people to see as oh, well, this guy probably doesn't like gay people like me, then you kind of have to take that into account. You can't just say oh, my intentions are pure, so it doesn't matter how people interpret my message. You have to be cognizant of how people are going to interpret your message, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but the way that people are going to internalize the message isn't uniform.
True.
And it's important to know that. So if I'm watching a comedy show, right, you could have 50% of the people who are watching who are just there for a laugh and really not internalizing it, and other folks who are absolutely outraged by what they're watching. I don't necessarily think that it's reflective of a societal-wide issue in that regards. So what is it that you're saying when you're talking about all right, some people might interpret these things and therefore because they interpret it that way, it's somehow that's all that matters. Because that's how I understood to kill the author. It's basically doesn't matter your intentions, how society views it is the issue. But my thing is, society's never going to view any of these jokes the same way.
True, but here's an argument I've had a lot in the past. The difference between private and public jokes. Okay, so I am a very dark and edgy person. You are everybody that came from the internet in the early 2000s. Okay, their sense of humor is very skewed, okay, or very dark. Or that's my impression, that people have very, very, very dark sense of humor, depending on where you lurked on the internet in those days. When I'm hanging out with friends in real life, people that I know who they are and how they are, the types of humor that I'll engage in are going to be very, very different than the types of humor that I engage in on a public platform, because I don't know all the time how something is going to be taken on a public platform, whereas on a private setting, I have more control over the audience, basically. So maybe for easy examples of this, right? If I'm messing around with my significant other, if she is, if she does something, I might make a lot of woman jokes, maybe she is doing the dishes and I'm oh, good job, you finally learned your place, something like that, right? A really edgy joke, right? I might make jokes and then they might make jokes back at me about being a dipshit or a male or thinking when I dig or whatever, dumb things like this, right? Now we might do this in private, but if I came publicly onto my stream and I started making a lot of those jokes, the problem is at this point, well, now my audience is a lot wider. I don't know how many incel or red pill people are in my audience, and I don't know how many people are going to be hearing me make these jokes, and now I'm reinforcing their shitty biases, Whereas I love women. I think women can do anything. I love my fiance very much, and I make these jokes, and I know they're jokes, and the reason why they're funny is because of how ridiculous they are. Other people might hear them and they think, well, this is funny because he's actually speaking truth to power. Fuck women. Hell yeah. This is some bullshit. Fuck that bitch. Make her do the dishes. Fuck yeah. Right. And if somebody's going to be taking my jokes in that way and I know it, I think it's a little irresponsible of me to engage with that humor publicly, knowing that I could be reinforcing those types of beliefs. Sorry, that's a really long-winded way of saying that.
Okay. Let me just think on that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's say you got 100 people who are watching. Okay, you got, let's say we'll start off at a minority. Let's say there's 25% of them who are internalizing this negatively and it's reinforcing the stereotypes, speaking truth to power, women are trash, blah blah blah. Okay,
based. Sorry, God, I'm sad at that guy. I'm so a dumb fuck. I don't know why I did that. I just did it.
You know what's funny about that is the timing was fantastic. The joke was trash, but the timing, I'll give you a 10.
Okay.
That really caught me. That was good.
Okay, go for it. What were you saying?
Right, 25%. Okay. Would you say that the fact that it reinforces their negative beliefs about women, therefore the jokes, you shouldn't be making them?
So
I'm curious at what percentage of people it reinforces their negative ideas before you
I'm uncomfortable
start to
with
feel
it.
like, oh, I probably shouldn't say this stuff.
So it's going to be it's going to depend on the severity of what we're talking about, and it's going to depend on the percentage of the things we reinforced. So for some things, I'm not going to care as much, and I'll try not to do it that much. For other things, I'll almost never do it because I don't think it's ever worth it. So for like, at this point, because we've covered so many things negatively related to women, I probably do have some people in my audience that are getting a little bit incelly. So I need to be careful about making those types of jokes. I am aware of that, and I've tried to curb this a little recently, or try to point out like when guys do dumb shit too, to keep it relatively balanced. But like I'll still make those jokes. If I see it becoming a big problem, I'll start to curtail it. But this is going to be an inexact science, right? I can't unfortunately poll every member listening at every point in time. But for other things, I don't know. Have we ever talked about the F word here before? The F slur?
Is that the one that rhymes with maggot?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, man.
So
Yeah. Classic.
being a gamer, I use this word all the time. In RTS, yes. It was like, this was just like your bread and butter word, okay?
I mean,
was like,
phonetically speaking, that word was fantastic back in the day.
yeah, that too. Yeah, you've got A and then the F slur. It's just
Who
like,
doesn't like saying maggot? But anyways, carry on.
And I use this word, and I've always been a pretty sharp person. So even in like 2010, 2011, 2012, like I debated using this word. I was like, it doesn't have anything to do with gay people. It doesn't mean gay, like blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. Like, don't take it so personally. Like, it's dumb when people freak out over words. And I had an experience where I was eating lunch I was in like a gamer house, and I heard somebody else at the table was talking about somebody, and they called somebody that F slur, but the person they called an F slur was gay, and they actually hated that guy because he was gay. They thought that being gay was disgusting. They hated that dude because he was gay. And I noticed that something I noticed personally, and this was just a feeling, I hadn't like cognitively thought about any of this, but when I heard him say that, I never wanted to say that F slur around that person. Now, I still didn't mind saying it on stream and all that shit. Is whatever. It's funny. Who cares? But around that guy, I was like, ooh, I don't want him to hear me say it and think that like, oh yeah, bro, like I hate gay people too. That made me really uncomfortable. And later on, as I thought more about it, I'm like, okay, well now I wonder, when I say certain things on stream, is there like 5%, 10%? Are there some number of people that hate gay people and they hear me call people, maggots? And they're like, hell yeah, Destiny, fucking go, dude. That's base, brother. And I was like, and when I thought about that, I basically thought that, okay, there are certain words that I think can unintentionally empower certain groups of people, and I'm going to try to stay away from these things. And this was before they banned hate speech on Twitch, before any of that bullshit. So it wasn't for sponsors or any dumb shit like that. It was just like it was a feeling of like, I don't like empowering those types of people. So I'm not going to say those types of things. So to bring it back, I guess some things are so extreme that I just don't think I'm ever comfortable joking about them in wide settings. And then other things are like a little bit more minor. And as long as I feel like my audience is like not going full hardcore in one direction, I'll probably joke with it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds responsible. I'm not mad at it. I think you take it upon yourself to make sure that you don't negatively influence these people. I guess my question to you then would be, at what point is it your responsibility to ensure that you, that whatever innocuous behavior you may be engaging in is not negatively influencing them towards bad outcomes?
So the way that I say this, this is how I say this, okay? I don't tell anybody actually, hate speech is one of the few things I don't give a fuck about. I don't really talk about it. Or like, I'm not like, nobody should say this or blah, blah, blah. All I would ask for is that people be aware of the effects that they have when they use certain words or do certain things. So for me, like, I try to be as responsible as I feel I need to. That's really vague, but it's always going to depend on like the topic, and it's going to depend, societally on what's going on at a particular point in time. But I'm usually not out here saying like, nobody can use these words or nobody can say this thing. Like, I just don't care that much about it. But if you are going to, I would just hope that like people be aware of like, the effects that you could be having. Just be honest about, what's going on. Somebody's going to be like, oh yeah, like I use the F slur all the time and I could be the M word all the time in like my form of entertainment, but I don't think no one in my audience is racist and nobody's getting any type of like homophobic or whatever, pleasure. I know, like, no, that's bullshit, dude. There are going to be some people. Just be honest about it. Just have an understanding of what you're doing. Even if you're not going to stop doing it, at least engage with reality, I guess.
All right. So you said something earlier that I thought was interesting, where you said, if I'm doing these jokes in private, I think it's much more acceptable because the context allows for me to do it in an environment where I can control a lot of things. Would you not argue that doing things at a stand-up comedy show is very similar?
Absolutely. Well, no, because you don't know anything. When I say I'm using private as a proxy for I know everybody there. So technically, a private thing wouldn't be like me and three strangers. I'm using private as like I know the audience, so I know how everything is going to be perceived, I guess is more what I'm saying.
Okay, but see, that's my issue, because now we're trying to tell, I think this is probably where we're going to part ways, is now we're saying that even in these private venues, okay, all right, in these private venues where, you can't access, even though you should know what the context of what a stand-up comedy show is. It's like, sometimes you'll have this happen, all right? There's a comedy show, and a Karen will come, and she'll hear a joke she doesn't like, and she'll be like, that's unacceptable, and she'll blow a gasket. But I'm like, this is a dark comedy show. They're going to talk about kids dying. That is what the show is advertised as. Okay. You should know better when you're going to one of these comedy shows where you're just like losing your mind at the fact that people are joking about this kind of stuff. So I think there's a certain onus on the audience. Okay. And the people going to these events or the people watching this stuff to be like, yo, I might see some wild shit. I might hear some wild shit. And if I'm not willing to entertain that possibility, I probably shouldn't listen to this. Or I shouldn't be there.
Sure. And like, again, to be super clear, I'm not telling everybody that like they should stop saying something. Just be aware of what's going on. Like, I like dark comedy. I think there are places for it. Yeah, I just think it all depends on like how you engage with it. But like, yeah, I'm not here to say that you should never tell dark jokes or anything like that. Just be aware, I guess, of the venue. Yeah.
But to take from that point, I think, just to extrapolate from that, right? So the context of a comedy club, which I think is already really important right there, right? Because people are experimenting, they're trying out jokes sometimes. Like if you're going to see a professional show, it's much more polished, obviously, but they've worked through this stuff or they're working through it and trying to figure it out. So you hear wild stuff, and I see people lose their mind all the time. And I just get confused sometimes when people watch comedy shows and then they just lose it. Oh, how could this person make this kind of joke about genocide or rape or murder or incest? And I'm just like, bruh, that was what comedy's always been. Well, yeah, they're reinforcing negative stereotypes about black folks. Have you ever watched black folks do comedy? Like when we do, listen, I do a lot of shows. It's constant reinforcement of negative stereotypes.
True, but I think there's a reason why it works generally when black people do it.
Okay.
I'm curious.
I want to disagree with you on that one, but yeah.
You wouldn't, or you would?
I would.
Okay, yeah, so I'm super curious. So if you, in the feeling of your mind, does it feel different if, let's say you were talking to a black person and they started bringing up a bunch of like, I hate it when black people do like, I hate the clothes they wear, the rap culture shit.
I hate when they shoot sideways. Or
versus like a white person making those complaints to you. Does it feel the same or does it feel different?
Okay, so I'm of the mindset, for me personally, that folks reinforcing these negative stereotypes, I'm fine with it, okay? But I would argue that if I'm coming from the perspective that these things have a negative impact, that people, let's say like folks reinforcing negative stereotypes about black people is harmful to black folks and the movement or whatever, I would argue that black folks doing those kind of stereotypes is more harmful, okay? Because of the fact that once you see yourself doing it, it would technically, quote unquote, normalize it to everyone else. Because, oh, well, if he says these negative things about himself, why can't we?
So, okay, that's further down the road. I don't think I would necessarily disagree with you there. So the one thing I would say about the difference between like a person in a group versus a person out of a group is that in one sense, it can feel like a genuine frustration / shared struggle. But I think in another sense, it can just feel really hateful. And I think that's the difference for why. Now, I agree that we can go further on down the conversation, like, well, should it still happen regardless of that feeling? Maybe. But I feel like if one black person complains to another black person about gangsters or thugs or rap or whatever, it feels more like a, hey, this is our problem and it affects us and this is a shared struggle we have, versus it's like a white person complaining. It's not really like I understand your struggle and we need to fix it. It's more like, man, you are shit, you're garbage. This is who you are and this is what I hate about you. I feel like there's a difference in the internal group making the criticism versus an external group making the criticism for like observational comedy. Like, could you imagine somebody besides Chris Rock doing his infamous, you know, I don't even know how to say this with censors, the A versus the R skit. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. That skit doesn't land the same, I think, if a white person does it, even if like they're not trying to be hateful or anything, right? It'll just feel different. It feels like an outsider is like passing judgment on you and your race and your group of people or whatever, versus like an internal person like making some funny observations like, yeah, this is, you know, true, and this is something that we all kind of struggle with and deal with, you know?
I would say that if somebody from outside the group tries to do that kind of humor, they just gotta land really well, because the audience doesn't give them as much leeway to experiment or play around. Now that's due to the audience's sensibilities, which I understand is the cultural climate, that's fine. I don't disagree with you that it doesn't land the same, but what I would argue is that because you are given that carte blanche as someone from within the group to say whatever you want, to everybody on the outside who's watching it, it normalizes certain stereotypes where even you, Destiny, are coming out and be like, yeah, you know, NAs or jiggers are really different than jiggers, okay?
Sure,
like, you know what I'm saying? Like, right? It normalizes it to you because you don't see anything wrong with it, because Chris walks out. I'm like, I'm not going to say it, but at least now I'm starting to think it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And this is a really hard one, because I get into a lot of debates with people over, because language and the N-word is like the most popular fucking thing for white people to debate on the internet, right? When it comes to the N-word, this is something I say a lot, where it's like, if this word is so fucking harmful and so horrible and so damaging and so traumatic, like, shouldn't like white people stop saying in rap then? Like, shouldn't we try to get rid of this completely? Like, it's really weird that it's so popular here, but we think it's like the worst thing in the world, you know? So I understand that like externally, like even groups internally can reinforce things that other people will take in a negative way potentially. That's something that we should deal with. I agree with that. I guess I was talking to the feeling for why it feels different. Although maybe it should still, The example that I thought
different.
It feels different. The example that I thought of in the middle of this is that like, as an American, okay, fuck this country and fuck the fucking people here, okay? Holy fuck, there are so many horrible goddamn things about this country. And there are so many horrible things about the people here and the shit that we believe in and everything we do. God damn, it fucking pisses me off. But if a goddamn European types that shit on the internet, you better believe I'm busting out my MAGA hat. I got my American flag behind me. I got my fucking Declaration of Independence in my pocket, and I'm about to go to bat for my fucking country. And I will destroy these Britbonger European poverty ball loving fuckers. They try to shit on my country. Right? It feels different when a European is attacking my country. I'm ready to go to war. Okay, it's Revolutionary War 2.0. But when it's Americans, like, yeah, fuck this place. Our cities suck. Everything's boring. Our cell phone coverage sucks. But when an external party does, it just feels different, you know. And and I think
I want to hit you with that. I want to hit you with that because you touched on that and I think it's interesting.
Sure.
Let me ask you, how do you feel when women say men are trash?
Fuck. Okay. I was going to say fuck that.
Just briefly, how do you feel?
I used to think it was funny.
Okay. But now you're like, it kind of bothers you, right?
Yes, because there was...
Hold on. I get more annoyed when men say it.
Sure.
Because I'm like, you brown-nosing fucking loser. You are normalizing it to all the ladies and being like, yeah, but you know what? These fucking dudes are trash. I'm not like the others. I hate it so much when dudes do it, because I'm like, that's so goddamn cringe. So when I'm watching a black person, get up here and be like, fuck, black people can't hold a job. I'm like, niggas, shut up.
Yeah.
Right? So for me personally, I think if you are within a group, it's probably going to annoy the group far more if you say a bunch of shucking. That's why we have a bunch of terms for black folks who shuck and jive, right?
Sure.
Or Uncle Toms. And if you ask people, they hate them motherfuckers, okay? So from my perspective, I get what you're saying, where it feels different. But when it's part of your group, it feels a little bit like betrayal. It feels, because it hits harder, and you see... When you do it, you see how other people look at you in the group. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think what you said before is really important, and it's really fucked up that we do this. But I think it is true that if you are going to tell really edgy or deprecating humor or whatever, the jokes have to be really funny. Otherwise, it just comes off as really bad. But you can get away with it if the observation, the joke is really funny. But if it's not, then it just comes off as everybody being like, the fuck, dude, you're just like, you're a piece of shit, you know?
The reason why is like when you go to edgy stuff, right? It creates an immediate amount of tension. If I go into a room and I say Harvey Weinstein, I could feel everyone's assholes clench.
Sure, yeah.
Okay? If I get them to see the punchline and they get to release, the laughter is that much larger. All right? That's why comedians who do super daring bits get so much respect, because there's the anxious feeling and then there's the release afterwards. It's like a roller coaster, right? It's like that little high point before the drop. That's what that is. Okay.
Sure.
When I tell people if you want to do edgy stuff, I'm like, go ahead. You should be able to experiment. Go do whatever the fuck you want to do. Okay. But just understand it. The edgier you're gonna get, the more it can be volatile. I see people all the time doing crazy jokes at open mics, like and the punchline is trash, and you can see the awkwardness and there is. Listen, I'm a terrible person. I know this because I go to comedy shows and I don't laugh. But if I go to open mics, I'm dying. Okay, and I'm the only one dying laughing, because I can see the moment before they deliver the punchline, their expectation and the reality smack together, right? There's a moment where the comedian delivers the punchline and he's like, women are stupid. And there's a quietness and a stare between the comedian and the crowd that is palpable. You can taste it, okay? It is the greatest feeling. It makes a lot of people uneasy, but that's the truth about edgy stuff. I tell folks, you want to tell edgy jokes, go ahead. But if it's trash, don't be surprised when folks feel some type of way.
Sure.
My only thing is, I don't care how people feel. You're entitled to whatever it is you want to feel. But I think when folks say it contributes to a culture of violence, then I start to feel weird about it.
Yeah, I guess like the way I have to be careful when I talk about these things, because like I would agree with that, but I would still defend it.
Okay.
Like here's like something that I say a lot, and I have a really hard time getting conservatives to come on board with this, but like I'm actually a pretty big free speech person. I actually super enjoy freedom of speech and like all of the freedoms that were afforded in the United States related to freedom of speech. I super appreciate it. I love it. I think it's one of the coolest things about our country. But while I do believe that, I'll also acknowledge there's a cost to it. You're going to hear a lot of like genuinely horrible fucking shit. And there are going to be people that are going to get sucked into things that in another country that, you know, had like more stringent controls on things, they wouldn't have gotten sucked into. You know, we might have more Nazis. We might have more tankies or whatever the fuck, you know, more crazy flat earthers or whatever. That might be, or anti-vaxxers or whatever. That might be the case. But you know what? I'm willing to accept that trade-off because I really enjoy the freedoms afforded to us for being able to be, you know, hypercritical of politicians, companies, whatever. It's one of those things again where I say like I just wish people would recognize that there is a cost. You just have to be aware of the cost when you do things. That's all I would say. Yeah.
I agree, and I think it's the very same reason why I think when the whole Hassan business went down, I said, I mean, like based off the guidelines, I'm not mad he got banned, but I feel like the policies on these slurs make no sense. You can't. It just doesn't make sense how you go from one and you arbitrarily say, all right, this one's fine, and then you're like, oh well, you know, because some people were oppressed and these words. I was like, bro, this doesn't make any sense. This whole policy is stupid. So I don't know how you stand on it specifically, but I basically came out with the take, and I don't think it was too popular. But I'm like, this should just all be allowed. I don't think I want to be hearing them all the time, but I just don't understand how you can make these rules and make them make sense from my perspective.
Yeah, I think, I feel pretty similarly. Like, you brought up that woman thing earlier, like men are trash. I used to hop on a lot of those trains for those types of jokes. I love the white ones. Like making fun of white people it was like a national pastime on the stream. It was really funny like a couple years ago. But I think going along with what I said earlier about like the mood and the vibe and what people are feeling or whatever, my opinions on a lot of these things started to change when it felt like they were no longer jokes, but people started to sincerely feel this way. You know, like saying like, man, fucking men are trash, dude. And there are a lot of dumb things that men do, and it's funny to make fun of that. But it's different when it feels like the room is full of people that actually sincerely, genuinely fucking hate men or white people, you know? Like I'll make fun of I call black people white people on Twitter. It was just fun shit. It was funny shit to do this, to make fun of people, which is really funny. But it changes when I feel like, well, hold on. Now it feels like there's a lot of people that actually fucking hate white people. And I don't want to be that Uncle John, I don't know what the white version of that is, that's on Twitter, like throwing white people under the bus now and like contributing to that like culture of hatred. Because now it feels like people actually do fucking hate white people. And I don't actually want to be a part of that. It was funny when it was a joke, but when people are serious, it's not really funny anymore. Yeah.
And I think that's I've had this happen before at comedy shows where somebody said something that really kind of stood out to me after I said a joke. And I remember I called him out on it. It was an audience member. I remember I did a joke and the dude just said something that kind of threw me off. I was like, huh? What did you say? And it kind of dawned on me in that moment that for him, he thought like, oh, we're on the same side. I had to be like, nah, bro, I'm not with you. Like I still enjoyed my joke and everybody else was cool with it. But the way that he reacted kind of made me double take like, oh, wait, you taking this the wrong way. I don't know how often it happens to you. Maybe I don't know what kind of rooms you're in, but like, how often does it happen where you're doing the joke and everybody in the room's like, yeah, man, white people are worse. Let's just get rid of them all. Like, what kind of rooms are you in? Like, that's what I want to know.
Yeah, I mean,
I can understand if it's one person, but like, what kind of rooms are you in where everyone's like, fuck, man, let's just take the pussy. Fuck these bitches. Like,
well, so like, my rooms are all virtual, right? But so here's like a good example.
Oh, that's a problem.
Yeah, here's a good example. Is that like, there are certain things that I could tweet, but when I look at the type of support I get, I'm like, I don't know about this. Like, I might say something like somebody might say something along the lines of like, you know, I'm trying to think. I hate that all my examples are racial because it's making this conversation a little more than it needs to be. For men or women. Okay, for men or women. Let's focus on this more. Okay. For men or women, okay, somebody might tweet something along the lines of like, hey, you know, like, I think that women are like being a little bit too softcore porny on Twitch, okay? I agree with that. And I might tweet something that's like, yeah, you know what? I think that women are a little bit too extreme on Twitch. Like, some of the softcore porn shit needs to go. I think this is too extreme. But when I noticed that my mentions started to get full, like, yeah, true. Fucking sluts that show cleavage on Twitch are fucking disgusting. This is like horrible. Like, they should be forced to. And I was like, whoa, hold on. Whoa, brother, okay? You're not my audience, okay? You are not the person that I was trying to establish camaraderie with that tweet, you know? When I notice the type of support that I get, it's probably similar to your feeling of like the way that a person laughs at something, you know, it's like, wait a second, hold on. We're connecting in a way that I didn't want to connect with you, you know?
Yeah, but see, I think when it comes to jokes, I think already the first fuck up was just like bringing that up in regards to tweets and Twitter. Like, I don't know, man. Maybe it's because I've been to a lot of comedy shows. I've never seen what you experience on Twitter in person. And I don't think anybody really has. Unless you went to like fucking some rural spot in Alabama and you went in a place with white hoods. Like, I just don't think people would ever have those kind of reactions. So I question how real that kind of reaction is in general. Like, I've never done a comedy show and everybody's like, man, yeah, man, these ladies is whores. Like, let's get rid of them. Most people understand what it is that they're watching and the jokes that they're internalizing. When you tweet something, I feel like just first off, the people who are on the platform, it's already a big L. One. And two, the people who would even reply are already another subset of people that are a little bit weird. It's like, I just question how much of that is a real reflection of people who are internalizing these jokes and be like, fucking whores, you know? Like, I just don't like Twitter as a platform to gauge that kind of response from people.
Yeah, I can understand that. So this is going to sound kind of weird, but the closest real life analog that I would have to Twitter, or even as a younger person, I felt kind of similarly, was and you know what? Maybe this is the second most degenerate place on earth. Were the poker tables at the casino. I used to work at a casino, and my restaurant was across the aisle from the poker room. And there were three guys that I was pretty close with: the two Turkish guys and a Greek dude, Murad, and Dimitri. And I would play poker with these guys every weekend too. But I noticed that, like, even with them, like, they would joke a lot about like Greek. The Greek dude would, you know, taught me random Greek slur words or whatever, or not slur words, like malaka, like calling people shit or whatever. Like, and the Turkish guys had like funny jokes and shit too. But there were sometimes you would find a couple white guys that would go to these tables. I say white, I'm sure it could have been other guys, but I'm thinking of two in particular. And when they shit talk these dudes, it wasn't funny. They hated these motherfuckers, and they would bring out. I don't even remember some of the weird family jokes or like the Greek fucking jokes that they would bring out for these guys, but it felt different. And, you know, if I was joking around with Dimitri and his brother and a couple of our friends, you know, we might make like weird Greek jokes or Cuban jokes or white trash jokes or whatever. But with those other guys present, absolutely fucking not. It felt different because those guys actually fucking hated them, you know? That's probably the most similar environment I think I've been in to like to like Twitter, I guess, was that casino.
Yeah, I don't know if this is like more of a European thing, but sometimes when I be hearing their jokes, like their jokes are just so foul, like it's so dry. It's just like, oh yeah, you guys are born from monkeys. This is like, whoa, but that's just normal over there. I don't know how much of it is actually just cultural or it's just straight up racism. I'm not really familiar.
Yeah.
But I personally don't. But if that's what you've experienced in person, that's the closest thing. That's fair. But like I said, I just feel like online world is not the place, and I think that's why a lot of communities don't really fuck with Twitter or things like that when it comes to their humor, or they don't even want their jokes transcribed into text because they understand that it's just not a platform built for any kind of nuance or context. It's like, It's like half the people who are responding on Twitter haven't even watched any of the bits that they're complaining about. It's like, what did fucking Bill Burr say? He said, "What about a trans woman?" But then you watch it in the flow of the conversation and the whole joke, and it's like it makes sense in that context. And so I don't know. I just think Twitter is not the place. It's not the place. It's not the place.
I had it was either Kotaku or a Vice reporter was talking to me doing an interview about a piece they were working on, and having them, it was one of the most fucking mortifying experiences of my life. Having them repeat things that I'd said back in the past and like a monotonous, like reading it off the paper, like things are like, this lady's like, so I remember with the conversation I had, so she's like, so in the past you guys used to tell used to make extreme threats to each other online. And I'm like, well, they weren't really threats, but I mean, like, yeah. And she's like, oh, okay. Well, like, can I read some of these? You can tell me if you like remember these. I'm like, yeah, sure.
God.
And she's like, so here you said you were going to find this guy and you were going to slit his throat with a razor blade that you got from your sponsor. What did you mean by that?
God.
And I'm like, okay, wait, okay, now that sounds really extreme, okay? But you got to understand, okay? I'm joking, it's sarcasm. But when she's like reading these things off to me, I'm like, okay, Jesus Christ. Now it sounds really fucking bad. You're making it really weird, all right? So I understand that fear of having something like transcribed to text. You can definitely come across in very different ways, you know?
Okay, so this is a complete. I completely understand. I had a girl who I used to hook up with 5 years ago hit me up recently. And she said something funny. She's like, Abba, are you still interested in petting me? And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Petting? That's sus as hell. It's like, come on. It's like you used to say that all the time. I had never said I wanted to pet your ass. The fuck is you smoking? And she's like, no, you did. So she pulled up a conversation from 5 years ago.
Oh, no.
And she shows me this message, okay? And she's like, see, Abba? And it reads, hey, I wouldn't mind if you pet me tonight. And I'm like, why would I fucking say that? So I read the context of the conversation, and she had used the word a bunch of times.
Sure.
And then she said, I want to pet your dick. So I was like, hey, man, you can pet me tonight, right? Just in response, because I would never say it otherwise.
All right,
But the way she read it out of context just threw me for a fucking loop. And I was like, I mean, you want to pet my dick? Let's go, you know? But for the way she said it, I was like, bro, I don't say that shit. So to me, that's very similar to someone calling you on that, because I think in the context of something like, I'll slit your throat sounds terrible.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, and you were also super edgy. Like that's you were super edgy, bro. But I think once you understand it within the confines of that relationship and that dynamic, it makes perfect sense.
That's how we had to survive back then, okay? Yeah.
No. I just think white boys were on some other shit, because I was saying some wild shit online. I mean,
hey, hold on, listen, okay? Black people in the early COD lobbies, they were saying some crazy shit too, okay?
But they were calling white people nigga, like, y'all like that shit low-key.
Probably. Man, I'm gonna be honest with you. We had the F slur on RTS. We didn't say the N word as much. That was for FPS players. So unfortunately, I didn't get to live that dream. Thank God though, because then my early career would have been filled with the N word instead of the F slur. So I get off a little bit easier, I guess. Jeez.
Yeah. Speaking of the N word,
Speaking of, yeah.
Speaking of it, so during the whole Hassan thing, right? Somebody was asking me about that, and I was like, guys, if you are very honest with yourself, it makes no sense that anybody's allowed to say this on the platform, because it's not like black folks universally agree who should and shouldn't be able to say it. There's like so many black folks who are like,
yes,
nobody should say it, right? And then you have other black folks who be like, some people should say it. And then you have other black folks who are like, everybody should say it. But YouTube has adopted this policy where it's just like, if you're black, we'll give you a pass. And Latinos also, and Asians as well. But if you ask black people, they're like, Asians should never get to say it. And then someone will be like, well, white people can say it if they grew up in the hood with us. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. So my personal thing is, just either make it all okay or none of it, because it just doesn't make any sense otherwise. But it's not like I want to see a bunch of white folks be like, hey, what up? I'm not, don't do that. But in terms of the rules, it doesn't make no sense. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It doesn't.
It's a wild world out there.
Yeah. So just wanted to say that real quick. Hold up. Let me pull this up. Yes. I never did ask you about this, but I saw a bunch of your fans were DMing me. They're like, yo, how could you ever defend cuties? Did you watch the movie?
I did not, so I don't have a strong opinion on it. But I have cautioned people that if you're going to have a strong opinion on it, you should probably watch it. That's why I didn't talk about that Chapelle bit for a long time too. And then by the time I watched it, nobody cared about it anymore. But like, I get really upset when people have really strong opinions about things and haven't seen it at all. It's like, chill. Like, Jesus.
Yeah, so I ended up watching it. Because everybody's losing their fucking minds.
Yeah, holy shit.
And, I go to check it out, right? And I was so surprised when I watched it. And everyone was like, "Yeah, it's clearly pedo bait." And I was like, the message about the movie is to clearly like tell kids not to say." People understood it, but they didn't like how graphic some of the scenes were, or whatever it was. I could understand that portion. I could understand people felt a little bit uneasy about that, but it just struck me as a little bit odd where a movie where its whole goal was to say, don't do this kind of thing, and it's terrible, and it has negative effects, and the young women who do this are negatively impacted for the rest of their lives, that people would take it and they would rail. Like, I felt like the response, you would think Epstein or somebody else like sponsored the movie. Like the way everybody reacted, you would think it was like some shit like that. I'd finished watching the movie, and you know what honestly came out for me? I had realized that if I ever had a young daughter, how much I'd want to make sure that she didn't fall into certain the traps that the young women in that thing fell into.
Sure.
Because it made me realize a lot of the pressures that young women. It made me understand young women a lot better. Were the graphic scenes necessary? Maybe not. But I just felt like everyone's reaction to the thing, it just seemed like nobody had seen it. They just heard what other people said, and they decided to lose their minds. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, that's what the feeling, the outrage came off as me too. But anytime you do anything related to children, people get really weird really quickly about it. So
very fast, very fast, and they lose all rationality. And I'm just like, and also, like it's people also have to remember it's also in a European context, which I think the sensibilities are a little bit different than the kind of more puritanical North American context. Like nudity, for example, in American movies is not the same as it is in European stuff. Are you familiar?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had to be careful like on European beaches with Melina and shit, because you'll fucking run into like naked kids running around and shit. And I don't think that's as common in the United States, and probably not in Canada either.
No, it's not. So I'm familiar with like the sensibilities. I have a lot of family who live out there. I've visited so many times, so I know their relationship with it is different. In fact, the movie didn't get that much press in terms of outrage in Europe at all. It was really more of a North American thing where everyone lost their mind. So people also have to appreciate where it's produced and how they view things differently, right? The same token, like the rest of the world looks at like American women twerking and doing all this weird stuff, like what the f are these ladies doing? But us, we think it's normal. A lot of the shit that they have over there that's normal to them, we look at it and we're like, oh my God, how could you? It's just cultural relativism. I think that's a term.
A little bit, yeah. Your values are a little bit relative to your culture, yeah.